What I have for you today are 9 positive traits of people with autism, focusing on those with high functioning autism, or some people call it Asperger syndrome. Number 1 is this: we tend to be very sincere. People with autism don't like dishonesty. So if you're dealing with somebody who has autism, guess what? This is an individual that typically you can count on, somebody that you can trust, somebody who is sometimes gets themselves in trouble because they tend to say what's on their mind. They tell you what they think. Well, a lot of people don't want to hear what you think. They care about what they think. They have their idea how things should be done, and usually that has a selfish motive. Well, along comes a person with autism, and they say, nah, I don't think that's quite right. Sorry to offend you, and they don't even know they're offending people often. Or I should say, we don't know we're offending people often, but still, that is a very valuable trait, particularly if you are in the workplace, because an employer, if they have any sense, prefers employees who are very straightforward and very honest, people who want to get the job done and want to get it done right. Well, there's a problem there. And the problem is that when you put a person with Asperger syndrome, high functioning autism, into a workplace, they have this contradiction, they have this conflict with other workers who are advancing self. And a lot of times there is a social interaction going on of competition. Because of that, we find that people with Asperger syndrome often prefer to wear cologne. I'm curious whether or not you think you would fall in that category. But I've had people who come and do work on my house, for example. Years ago, we had new siding put on our house, vinyl siding. And this guy came and he showed up. He worked for a company, but he showed up all by himself. Normally, you'd have a whole crew show up. And the owner of the company said, this guy just prefers to work alone. And I'm guessing, don't know, but I'm guessing that that person may have been autistic, or maybe he just had that particular trait that is so common among people who are autistic. They want to work alone because they want it done right, and they don't want somebody looking over their shoulder all the time, trying to point out their flaws or their errors, particularly when there are none. So if you want somebody done right, who does things right, someone who is sincere, someone who is honest and straightforward, and you're an employer, well, you might want to check into hiring people who have autism. Number 2, and this falls along the same line, so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but people with autism pay close attention to details. They tend to have a lot of focus. They have an end vision. They have a perception of how things ought to be done. They see the whole picture. And because they see the whole picture, they focus on the end of the whole picture. And so, that sounds kind of contradictory too, doesn't it? On the one hand, they see the big picture, but on the other hand, they're very defined in seeing the end product. So we say that they have attention to detail. Now, along those lines as well is innovation. People with Asperger syndrome, people with autism, tend to be very, very creative. They see a different way of doing things. And again, I think maybe this could be attributed to the fact that people with autism just don't follow the herd. They don't follow the crowd. They don't, the troop, I guess, if you're a monkey. They don't follow what everyone else wants to do, but rather they see, there may be a better way of doing this. There may be a more creative way of doing this. Now, there's a term that is in vogue called repurposing, and people will say, let's take this thing and we can find another use for it. We call that repurposing. That's how a person with autism thinks. So you may have a wheelbarrow, and the person with autism wants to repurpose it as, as a lawn ornament, put flowers in it, whatever. Well, a lot of people do that, but that is specifically a trait, not uniquely, but specifically a trait that we find a lot in people with autism, or at least I do. And what I'm saying basically is fundamentally based upon life experience. Nearly 70 years now, I've been autistic, and I've observed myself and what I like and don't like, but I observed others, and I've read and studied autodidactic. So I've noticed that, yeah, people with autism tend to be creative. We see the end design, we see the end product, but we find a lot of creative outside the box ideas to get there. Number four is, speaking of get there, number four is just flat out perseverance. We just don't let go. We want it done right. We want it done proper. We want it done, we just want it done. We want it done completely. So usually that is a good thing because we can see everything all the way to the end. We want to make sure that this is not just an end, but it is a proper end. Now, not long ago, I took a computer to a computer shop to have it fixed. And after a few days, which I thought was much too long, they called me up and said, okay, we got your computer fixed, come pick it up. And I went and picked it up, and they said, the problem with your computer is I needed a new power supply, and I couldn't relate, why did it need a new power supply when it wouldn't boot? And besides that, it had a relatively new power supply in it. So I took it home, plugged it in, and guess what? It didn't work. Well, they got the job done, they said, but they didn't do it right. They just did it, and I think they didn't know what they were doing or didn't care. And what was important to them was they get paid and get that computer out of the shop so they can get something else in. They didn't care about doing it right, is what I'm saying. So they persevered to the end, but no, they didn't. A person with autism, more likely, I think, would not be happy unless it was done right. They want it done right. Now, I don't know if you've ever painted a room, and I don't know how much you pay attention to detail, but when I see paint in a room, see somebody painted a room, and there's a little bit of paint, you can tell that whoever painted the room, they got a little bit of paint on the woodwork. The colors don't match. That's not right. That drives me crazy. When I paint a room, when I do that type of thing, I want the lines to be perfectly straight. I want paint that goes on the woodwork to go on the woodwork, not on the wall. And I'm talking about absolute positive straight. And I want the paint that goes on the wall to not go on the woodwork. And that seems to be pretty much universal. And that's why people with autism sometimes tend to be overly tidy. Now, you can look at my office behind me and you can say immediately that you're not overly tidy, but yeah, things are pretty much in order. So we persevere. We want things done to the end, and not just to the end, but when we say end, we want it done correct. We want it done right. That is the end. Another good example of that maybe, have you ever gone shopping for a car? Maybe we're talking about computers, maybe for a computer, or maybe a camera, or maybe just anything. And you shop and you shop and you shop, and you compare and you compare and you compare, because you want the right one. And you watch maybe 1 million YouTube videos on that particular product because you want to make sure that the end comes out correctly. Is that a bit of an exaggeration? Yeah, probably. I'm not sure that everyone with autism goes to that extreme. But I think many of us do pay a little bit closer attention during that research. We're not necessarily spontaneous, let's put it that way. Number 5 is we tend to be undiscriminating in that we are open to ideas, we are open to people also, and we are not judgmental. So there seems to be that we have this universal respect for everybody. We don't see people in classes, not talking about school, but I'm talking about social classes. We don't see people as groups of good and bad. We just see people as people. Now, having said that, I got to tell you that I've got this problem where I tend to categorize people in white hats and black hats, that I see good guys and bad guys. That's probably because I watched too many TV westerns on television when I was a kid, but I tend to think everybody's a good guy, and there's this tiny minority of individuals who wear black hats. Those are the bad guys, but the rest of us are good guys, like 99.9%. I was watching an old TV show on YouTube yesterday. You remember The Fugitive? I think that was produced in 1962 or 1963. And, everyone was a good guy, and the fugitive, I forget his name, but my memory's slipping, but, there were bad guys, and just one of them and everyone else was a good guy, and everyone picked up that, well, I wish I could remember the fugitive's name, but everyone could pick up immediately that he was the good guy, and he could pick up immediately who the good guys and bad guys were, and they were all good guys except this one guy. That's kind of the way that people with autism view the world, at least the way I do. Everyone is a good guy, except one or two. So that is, hate to say it, that's a positive trait in that we see the positive and the good in everybody, but it gets us in trouble. So we are undiscriminating by and large, but when there is injustice, and that's something that is really important, we pick up on that immediately as well. We don't like injustice because we have encountered it so often, and because, well, we're honest. So along those lines, number 6 is we tend to be malleable. Now, wait a minute. I just said that we are not discriminating. That means that we don't discriminate against other people. Now I'm saying we're malleable, and that means that we are easily changed. Well, not necessarily. Let's say that, let's frame it in this context. Let's say you are very single-minded, and your single-mindedness tells you to stay on the road. Well, what if the road turns? Well, your single-mindedness will tell you to turn. If the road goes up, up a grade, or downhill, uphill or downhill, you follow the road, and so you are single-minded. Now, you're not going in a straight line, but you are malleable wherever the road goes. So both are true. We're persevering, and that we're staying true to the line, true to the road, but we are malleable, and when things need to change, we're willing to change. So we like to be consistent in that sense. So we tend to be universally, what is the word? Universally respectful to everybody. Where this gets us in trouble, and by the way, there's a positive and negative. There's always a negative side to every positive. There's two sides to every coin, so to speak, as that we expect everyone to think the way we think. I mean, human nature is that we tend to expect others to think the way that we think, and we are universally respectful, so we expect other people to be universally respectful, and we expect everyone to universally respect us. And it becomes very frustrating because that's not the way the world works. And throughout our lives, I mean, from almost day one, we expect to be accepted, and we're always frustrated because we're always not accepted. So naturally, we expect to be accepted, but in reality, that's not the way it works, and that creates cognitive dissonance, and it's very frustrating. But we're malleable. Number 7, ironically, is I say we're malleable, but we're also very devoted to individuals, sometimes to causes, to countries, to companies, and sometimes those will conflict. So you can be very loyal to a principle, but are you patriotic? Well, yeah, I think I'm patriotic, but if my country does something that violates my principle, which do you go with, the patriotism or the principle? Well, I think a person with autism would typically choose, but not always, to go with principle. It depends on how your mindset works, but we are devoted to individuals. In other words, way to say that, I guess, is to say that we are very loyal. Part of that is because we don't always see beyond the what I would call the superfluous. But I can say this, usually when a person with Asperger syndrome gets married, they stay married. When they gave that commitment till death do us part, till death do us part. Most people with autism, or many, I should say, people with autism, don't get married because, first of all, it's hard to find a mate because they don't socialize. But once they get married, they tend to stay married no matter what happens. So we don't always see beyond the superfluous. That is because we lack cognitive empathy. And by that I mean we're not good at reading body language. We don't always understand the underlying understanding, the underlying communicating of what people are saying or thinking, because we take everything, it seems, at face value. Well, that takes us to number 8, and number 8, the positive thing about people with autism is affective empathy. Well, a better way to say that, I think, is just affection. We tend to be very affective. We actually care genuinely about people, which is kind of tough when you live in a world where, dog eat dog world, as they call it, where people tend to value not being effective, not being affectionate, I should say. It's almost as if that is a weakness. And because we tend to be affectionate, we are often seen as weakness and therefore vulnerable and gullible. And therefore we become easy targets for people who like to enhance their self-esteem, their sense of self-worth by hurting other people. That's why we are often bullied, not just in school and as childhood, but bullied nonetheless in adulthood, even though by different methods and different manners. So we tend to be very affectionate, and other people are not as affectionate, and therefore we are seen often as, by neurotypical people, as social liabilities. So they reject us because they see us, this guy's really naive. Well, if we see someone who is hurting, we know from experience what it feels like, more so than other people. And also, we expect other people to sense when we are hurting, but they don't. And that becomes very frustrating. All right, that takes us to number 9, which is one of the strong points of people with autism is they have a strong sense of fairness. This kind of goes along with affective empathy, but we are repulsed by social hierarchies because we see, as we said earlier, we see people as, they're just people. Everyone has equal value no matter who you are. Even bad guys, we can stop and think, this person committed a horrendous crime or maybe a series of horrendous crimes, and we're wondering, at least this is the way I think, you could tell me in the comments if you disagree with this, but even someone who is a psychopath, someone who is a serial killer, somebody who has no affective empathy, we look beyond. We don't just say this person is pure evil. At least I don't. I say this person has perhaps a neurological problem. Maybe there's something wrong with his brain. Instead of throwing everyone, waiting till people commit horrendous crimes and then locking them away or executing them, maybe there could be some intervention before they do the damage. Makes perfect sense to me. And again, that's showing that it's not that we believe in there should be no justice for the victims of these people, but we're thinking these people should not have been victims in the first place. So we want justice to be done, but we want it to be done up front. We want it to be done correctly. And again, as we said earlier, we tend to see the outcome. We tend to see the end picture. We tend to see the big picture as it's done properly. 2 rectangles on the screen. If you like what you hear and you want to hear some more, all you got to do is click on one of those 2 rectangles, and we'll just keep on talking together, keep hanging out. But if not, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you guys next time.